Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Kayona, and I am a CSPC volunteer on the Reports and Evaluations Committee. We acknowledge that the Canadian Science Policy Conference is taking place on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples, and we acknowledge that their presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We respect our traditional hosts and thank them for allowing us to operate and work on this land. We are about to participate in an interactive session entitled Permafrost Change is profoundly impacting Canada, why this is an urgent priority, and what action is needed to adapt and build resilience. It is organized by NSERC Permafrost Net, and we encourage you all to please tweet about your favorite events and sessions from this conference using the @SciencePolicy and #CSPC22 hashtags. Finally, please don't forget to fill out the evaluation survey for this session in the program app. Your feedback is very important to us, and we will use it to make next year's CSPC conference even better. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the session.
Hello, that works better. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. You'll see that the panel, and we will be introducing ourselves through the introductory remarks, is seated down with everybody, because really the objective of the session today is to have a full and open discussion, questions, provocative ideas, I hope, and challenging questions. So I invite you all to participate in the discussion. The way we're set up today, I get to make a few remarks, and I will take a few minutes to do that. And then I'll be handing it over to the panel members, who will introduce themselves and offer some perspectives. There'll be a session where I get to pose what hopefully are some tricky questions to get the discussion going, but then open it up to all of you as soon as we can, and really hope we have a good discussion this afternoon. So I'm Janet King. I have the privilege of being the chair of the board of directors for NSERC Permafrost Net. And I just want to be clear right away, I suspect most people are in the room today because they already know that permafrost change is impacting everybody at the individual level, the community level, our national level, internationally, and that the impact is now, it's past, and it's accelerating. And this concerns us, and we have lots of expertise and lots of perspectives on what that change is and how best to make sure that we are managing and responding, mitigating, adapting to permafrost as best we can. It's real, it's urgent, and I could go on at length. I have notes here that would help me go on at length, but I think my panel members will be able to do that quite effectively. Just a little word on PermafrostNet for those of you who may not be aware. It's a almost 6-year partnership network that it's interesting in that it's a partnership network. It is uniting in a governance level, in a research level, and in a delivery level. Academia, stakeholders from Northern Indigenous communities, industry, government agencies, all who share the common goal and are advancing the work on boosting Canada's ability to adapt to large-scale permafrost thaw. Yet, even as this network has come together over the last few years, and an association, the Canadian Permafrost Association, is also advancing, we still know that basic data, knowledge, capacity are actually really surprisingly limited and probably not that well communicated either. So that using the data or making informed risk assessment is really, really tough. So today we have a panel of experts around us here who are going to share their perspectives and thoughts on this, as I mentioned. And what we've asked them to speak to from their own perspective is what are their priorities? What is permafrost change? How do we work with competing priorities? How should permafrost be considered in the broader landscape of both research planning and climate policy and in adaptation policy? And what actions could be pursued to better understand, adapt, and build resilience across Canada? And importantly, how do we get to action on this? So I'd like to get started. The order of panelists, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we're going to start with Emily. Emily Stewart-Jones, move on to Robert Way, and I need to say that we have one panel member who's on that laptop over there. Oh, he's up here, good. Hi, Robert. I'm glad you could join us. But he's seeing us from the laptop over there. Kumari Karanatni from Yellowknife, Greg Flato over here, and finally Deepika, who is right here beside me. So Emily, can I figuratively hand the mic?
Is this working? Yeah. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Emily. I'm a permafrost scientist. I'm also, I consider myself a northerner. I've lived in Whitehorse, Yukon for almost 4 years now. I'm currently a graduate student. I'm working on my master's. And I've also worked with Yukon government, so I'm a government worker. So over the last 7 years, I've been working within the permafrost world. I started as an undergraduate student at Carleton, and then I moved to the Yukon where I worked for government, and now I'm finishing up my master's. So as a graduate student, I've been working on permafrost in rock faces, so permafrost in steep bedrock. And the reason that we're interested in this is because with warming permafrost and thawing permafrost, steep bedrock slopes are becoming unstable, and this is resulting in big rock slides and landslides. So for an example, very recently during the 2021 heat dome in Western Canada, there was a very large rock fall that happened in northern BC, and that destabilized hundreds of millions of tons of rock. And this happened only 8 kilometers from an active mining site, a gold mine. And these sort of events are increasing in magnitude, increasing in frequency. And they are of concern, especially in the context where we are trying to extend our mineral extraction activities in permafrost environments. So both in the mountains, but also further north in the tundra. And to deal with these hazards, we need to have a better understanding of where permafrost is and how it's changing. And right now in Canada, there's a lot of gaps when it comes to where permafrost is and how it's changing. And part of the puzzle, the puzzle piece to working through this is having more data. So to be able to map hazards, we need to know where permafrost is, and we need to have temperature data, so ground temperature data, and we need to have geophysical data, so ground ice and ground materials. So right now there are efforts to bring together that data, but the problem is that it's being stored in a lot of different places. Sometimes it's even on people's personal computers. A lot of the time when scientists collect data, they don't necessarily share it. When consultants collect data, they have ownership of it, and the government doesn't even have access to it. They have to pay to get it back. So there's efforts to bring this data together and put it in a centralized location. That way, if someone has an interest in, let's say, mapping permafrost in an area, they can go to this database and download the data they want so that they can conduct their project. As of now, if they want to do that, they have to go to 10 different spots, talk to their friends, ask their friend to talk to their coworker to get the data. And there's projects right now to make this happen. I worked for the Yukon Geological Survey, or I still work there, as part of the team that designed, built, and populated the Yukon Permafrost database. And there's other projects in NWT and the Canadian Geological Survey is also working on that. But there's still lots of work to be done to make all those different databases interoperable together. So that's me as a government worker, as a permafrost scientist, but I'm also a northerner, and I can attest to some of the changes. I can't say that I've seen the changes happen because I haven't been there for that long, but I've heard about the changes. And yeah, the landscape is changing and it's affecting people, and people are having to change their way of life. This includes, trying to just travel across the land. It's changing. There's more standing water. The land is less predictable. And then, infrastructure is less reliable. So for instance, at the end of this summer in early September, there was a big rainstorm near Dawson City. And the Klondike Highway, which is the only access point to Dawson City, was blocked by a number of landslides. These landslides were coming down from permafrost slopes, which have been stable for thousands of years. This location was never glaciated, so it's older than 10,000 years or 15,000 years. And now with the changes we're seeing, all of a sudden these slopes are no longer stable. And we need to have a better understanding of this because it's expensive to deal with these issues. And it's affecting people's lives. And also as a northerner, I've understood the importance of building capacity in the north. Right now, a lot of the data that's being collected is being collected by people who are coming from down south. But it would be very practical and a lot more effective, and it probably would allow us to expand our monitoring network if we could get people who actually live up north or people who live in the communities to collect that data. And then there's also just not that many jobs in permafrost. I'm a permafrost scientist. I live up north, and I'm set to graduate in a couple months, and I don't know what kind of job opportunities are there for me in the north. I think that's it.
Yeah, I can hear you, but I think whoever has the mic is probably the person I can hear the best. It's kind of hard to hear if you don't have it. No.
Okay, Robert, can you hear me? No?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Thanks. I wanted to address that now so that it wasn't an issue later on, because I noticed one of the mics wasn't working for someone. But hi everyone, and thank you for having me here and letting me participate in this interesting panel. And a lot of the thoughts just shared by Emily are really interesting. My name is Robert Way. I'm a prof at Queen's University. But I'm most of my work is centered in the Labrador region, so in Northeast Canada, which is I was born and raised and spent most of my life in Happy Valley Goose Bay in central Labrador, and my family, I'm considered what's called a Halunangayat, which is essentially mixed between Inuit and some of the early settlers of the coast of Labrador. And so my family moved into the area and married into Inuit families and stayed and lived amongst Inuit since then. So we've been, around this area for a really long time, obviously. I started I went away for school and started to get exposed to some of the climate change work in the north, especially, and eventually kind of made my way from doing climate research to then glacier work, and now into the permafrost community, which is what I did my doctorate in. And my research programs have largely been focused on the Labrador area, and part of the reason for that is obviously because I'm from there, but Another part of it is that there was kind of a recognition early on in starting to look at this topic that there really wasn't work hadn't been done in the area on permafrost. I mean, when I started my doctorate on permafrost in Labrador, we hadn't had any scientific research on permafrost in the region in almost 30 plus years. And even the work that had been done was done in a couple spots kind of in the western interior, and there was no work done in the north. And you know, there really was an absence of information. And so part of the stuff we had started with doing was just trying to, you know, get a basic understanding of, you know, how much permafrost is there in the area, where, you know, what kinds of environments is it found in, you know, what potential risks are there for it to thaw, and you know, ultimately what risks are there to potential infrastructure and livelihoods and people who use these landscapes. And it's been a bit of a long process, right? I mean, when you are trying to build some of the initial understanding in the region, in addition to like trying to do things that have more practical usages, it takes a while to accumulate the type of information you need to justify decision making. Some of the challenges in our region is that, so Labrador, you know, it's listed on the maps that, you know, it's in the permafrost zones, but realistically there's not a lot of permafrost in the center and south of Labrador, except where it does exist, it can be pretty abundant, and it's all along the coast, which is actually the one place that a lot of the maps of permafrost said it absolutely wouldn't be. So, you know, that was kind of early on something that was a bit of a surprise, but I mean, not so much of a surprise if you talk to people in the area who had recognized some of the signs of this type of thing in the area. The absence of information about permafrost for many years led to decision makers feeling that it wasn't a consideration or a priority with some infrastructure projects. And so there's been a few surprises over the years that have come. There was a transmission line, and you know, that was generated for a big hydro plant. And you know, we tried to warn them because we were doing work at the time that, you know, that they might be going through some areas where there might be some risk of permafrost, and they kind of said, you know, we're not considering permafrost in this because the maps say there's no permafrost. And unfortunately, they ran into some issues, and there were, you know, kind of like millions of dollars of overruns, and you know, I don't necessarily say that if we had met more with them that it would have changed much, because they seemed quite firm in their ideas. But it just goes to show that there can be, you know, these things can be costly mistakes. And in another example in our region in northern Nunatsiavut is the Labrador Inuit land claim area, which is my father's from within that area. But in northern Nunatsiavut, there's a community, Nain, and that community has built this amazingly beautiful cultural center. But during the initial process for building it, there wasn't really much consideration given to permafrost until they started the geotechnical drilling for this, and realized the whole location that the center was going to be was underlain by permafrost, and that meant that there was, you know, a lot of extra engineering stuff that had to be done to deal with that. And, you know, this is kind of, if there's a gap of information, these are some of the challenges that exist where organizations, entities, you know, proponents of projects don't necessarily have to think about these things as common, especially in an area where it's not all over the place. Like in the Yukon, you know, it's been researched for a long time, but you know, there's a lot of permafrost, and so most organizations are kind of or companies are considering it, but in some other areas that are less well understood, there's some challenges there. And so one of the things that recently we've been doing a lot of work on is permafrost in the peatlands along the coast of Labrador. And one of the profound challenges that has come with that is a lot of these peatlands are actually heavily used by caribou. They're also heavily used by people because these are apic bake apple picking grounds, so cloudberry picking grounds, and it's a very important cultural berry for Inuit and Innu. And some of the best spots for them are these peatlands that are filled with these permafrost mounds. And there seems to be a lot of ongoing changes in some of these areas. And it may not sound in some cases like it has the same direct financial impact that some of the infrastructure challenges will have. But from a profound cultural impact, these things can be really important when these berries become less abundant because permafrost thaw is ongoing in these environments. So those are just some of the issues. Now going into the future, there's plans for a major airstrip in the northernmost community in Labrador and Nain, and there's right now the current airstrip is having structural issues that are probably linked to permafrost. We've done some permafrost work in the community there, and there are some challenges in certain parts. So that's something that in the coming years will be top of mind. But also, they've recently put out the government of Newfoundland and Labrador has put out an RFP for a plan for a road to go into the north of Labrador, into Nunatsiavut and Nitassinan, and that's going to introduce a whole host of challenges in relation to permafrost in the future. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting topic, and I'm excited to hear what the other panelists have to say about this. And thank you, Nakimik.
Thanks, Robert. And Kumari, another northern perspective.
Hello, is this on? Sharing. Hello, that's better? Robert, can you hear me? Hey, Robert.
Yep.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kumari Kunaratna, and I am going to be speaking to you with 3 different hats that I wear with respect to permafrost and why so much is happening and how not enough is happening. First of all, I'm a northerner, like Emily and Robert. I live in Yellowknife on the traditional territory of the Yellowknife Dene. And I've been working in permafrost regions for probably about just over 20 years, and I've been living in Yellowknife for just over 10 years. And in that time, I've seen that's not a long time compared to other people that have lived in the north. And I've seen things that are like, I've never seen that before. And and then I'm like, I've never seen that before. And I've seen it every year in the last 3 or 4 years, like thunderstorms with no rain, but lots of lightning and, or thunderstorms on the tundra. It just, when you are in an environment that you're so used to, and then you start seeing things that are new, it's a bit alarming and a bit spooky, really. And with respect to permafrost, we're seeing all kinds of changes. We're seeing landslides. We're seeing new roads that have just been built, having to be shut down because of washouts, unsafe conditions with respect to subsidence. The permafrost that holds is frozen ground that holds the land together. And when it warms and the ice within that ground melts, you're having something that is solid change state and profoundly change all kinds of environments. I'm also hearing about new roads that are planned, including from Yellowknife up through to the north coast through the Slave Geological Province, which is a mineral-rich area and an area that we know very little about the permafrost. hearing about, plans for roads in the Mackenzie Valley, again, an area that that is very active. Lots of permafrost research has been done there. And almost 50 years ago, Thomas Berger shut down the gas project there partly because of land claims that needed to be settled, but also because we needed to know more about the permafrost in that region to have a project of that size. And we still don't have the kind of data that we need in a systematic way, like Emily was explaining, where everybody can access that data to build the knowledge that is needed. So there's lots going on right now, lots of change and lots of projects that are coming. So that's my northerner hat. The other hat that I wear is I'm the assistant director at the Northwest Territories Geological Survey. And from that perspective, I work for the territorial government, and we now have 4 permafrost scientists that are in permanent positions within the territorial government, which is amazing and took a ton of work to get. And we are starting a lot of new projects, starting to look at permafrost characteristics in areas that have never been looked at before, and building relationships with the Indigenous communities in those regions. And we are still stretched so thin with the new 4 positions that we have. We are also partnering with academics as well as Permafrost Net to try to leverage the expertise from the South and supervising grad students to come up. And we need to make sure that those partnerships are done effectively and in the best interest of the North, so that the outcomes of those projects are serving the people there. My final hat that I wear is I'm the president of the Canadian Permafrost Association, and the Permafrost Association is about 5 years old. It was built out of and it was initiated in a meeting in 2017 where Permafrost Net, that was sort of the seed of both of those initiatives, Permafrost Net and the CPA, came out of a meeting in 2017. And honestly, when I started, I said this to my PhD supervisor a few weeks ago. I said, when I agreed to be the president of the Canadian Permafrost Association, I thought I would be chairing a few meetings, signing a few certificates, the sort of thing that professional organizations do. It's a good time. It's a bit of work. It's meaningful. You meet people. But it feels like the previous 2 presidents have set up the organization, the bylaws, and the bank accounts, and the website. And I have stepped on to a surfboard that is like just a huge wave is growing, and the demand on my time in terms of addressing the national adaptation strategy, initial sort of ask for feedback, giving letters of support to international projects that are wanting to work with Canadians, going down and meeting new colleagues with Jennifer Spence and John Holdren with Permafrost Pathways in September, and talking about their project on permafrost carbon and permafrost policy, and the need to work collaboratively together, and being asked to speak on behalf of Canadian Permafrost as a volunteer for this organization is not what I was expecting. And it's a lot. So a lot is going on, and yet we need some organization in Canada on what's happening, so we can coordinate the voice of permafrost science and permafrost stakeholders and permafrost, decision makers. At the moment, permafrost, because it's so multidisciplinary, it's engineering, it's water, it's vegetation, it's health in terms of contaminants, that sort of thing. So it's dispersed across a number of different federal departments, and there isn't one central voice for who to speak to the needs and to coordinate activities and priorities and data for permafrost in Canada. And so we're kind of diluting everything. I'm getting a bit irritated about, because permafrost is often mentioned in the first sentence or so about climate change in Canada. It's mentioned right off the bat because people know that Canada has permafrost and that permafrost is changing. But in the rest of the document, in the rest of the speech, there's nothing more substantial that comes with permafrost, and that is really, really needed at this time. And we can't wait any longer. It's now.
Thanks. Thank you. And for a very different perspective, I'm sure, over to Greg.
Does this work?
Nice.
Okay. Excuse me. So I'm Greg Flato. My background is in as a research scientist working in polar climate, sea ice in particular, but I sort of evolved into working on global Earth system models. I led the group in Canada that developed the Canadian Earth system model, and I'm now the acting director of the Climate Research Division within Environment and Climate Change Canada. And the Climate Research Division, among other things, does process studies related to the cryosphere and looks after the development and application of our global and regional Earth system models, which we use to provide quantitative projections of future climate, both globally and in Canada. Now, these models include some representation of the physical and biogeochemical processes that involve permafrost, but this remains a difficult topic. It remains a shortcoming in our modeling system, as it does in modeling systems like ours in other countries. This is an area that I think, as you said, has not received the level of attention that other processes like ocean biogeochemistry, for example, have received. And so it's an area that we're investing in, but investing in a pretty modest way, given all of the other things that we have to try to deal with in terms of improving our model. I want to say a little bit about how the research that we do and the Earth system modeling work that we do informs policy and regulatory development. And for that influence in Canada is actually a bit indirect, in the sense that probably the biggest way in which we influence domestic policy is through international enterprises, mainly through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. So I've been very fortunate to serve as an IPCC author. I currently serve as vice chair of Working Group 1, the physical science part of the IPCC. And lots of our researchers are involved as authors, lead authors, contributing authors. And the model results that we produce feed into the IPCC reports in a strong way. And those IPCC reports are important because they serve as the authoritative overview of climate science. They go through this rigorous review process that culminates in governments, the 195 member governments, approving line by line the summary text and agreeing to the underlying reports. So that gives them a power that most other science documents don't have. And those IPCC reports then underpin international climate policy, such as deliberations under the United Nations Framework on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. And it's through those international agreements that then domestic climate policy is strongly influenced. So Canada's net zero emissions target and policies and, in fact, regulations associated with that all derive from that. So that's kind of the roundabout indirect way in which we affect policy. But we also use these model results more directly to support adaptation planning, adaptation decision making, mitigation policy domestically, and so on. A lot of that is through data that we provide and disseminate through the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, with which we work very closely. So on the adaptation side, we're trying to provide information that allows users, stakeholders of various kinds to ask, how will climate change affect me, my sector, my industry, my local community, what have you? And where can I get information that will allow me to develop plans for new infrastructure investment, for a whole range of adaptation activities? And likewise, on the mitigation front, we provide quantitative information about how emissions globally and emissions from Canada alter the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and thereby alter climate, and try to make detailed projections of what that means for Canada. And in the mitigation area, there's lots of interest in how natural feedbacks in the climate system can either add to or reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And that's another area in which permafrost can play a large role. So one of the things that we've been hearing over the last few years particularly, and I think it will resonate with some of the other uses that we talk about here, is the need for much more detailed, higher resolution information. So historically, our work has been in global Earth system modeling, and that is because we want to ask, how does the global climate respond to global emissions? It's first and foremost a global issue. But when you get into the adaptation space particularly, you need much more detailed, localized information to allow you to decide how you're going to build a bridge, or whether you're going to move it here, how high should you make a levee. Those kind of decisions require local information. And that applies particularly, not exclusively, but to permafrost, where it can be very patchy, especially in the marginal zones. It can be on one side of a slope and not on the other. So you need to have that kind of information. So we are working on developing various downscaling tools to take the information from our global model and zoom in, if you will, to places where users would need that information. We have regional climate models, which are kind of the same as the global models, but with a limited area, but represent all of these processes. And we also have a variety of statistical downscaling techniques where we can get at less computational cost, we can get down to very local areas and build in observations in a way that can help offset some of the biases that these models have. So we have a lot of work that we're doing in that. A lot of that is informed by feedback that we get from users via the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, not so much directly to us. And I think we're making progress. We have a budget ask under the National Adaptation Strategy, which would enhance our capabilities there. I continue to have my fingers and toes crossed as to what will come from that, but we remain cautiously optimistic. And I thought I'd just end here with an example of how we work with certain stakeholders. We can't work with individuals. We're a pretty small organization, so we can't work with every individual users, but we do try to work with collections of users. And one of the ways that we've been working is with the National Research Council and the Standards Council of Canada to work on changing the building and highway codes to account for projected changes in extreme events like extreme precipitation, extreme heat, extreme wind events, extreme snow load, for example. So all of those things are important if you're designing a building, if you're designing a highway, if you're designing a bridge on a highway or culverts under a highway. All of those things are important. And the traditional way of doing that design is to look at historical statistics and assume incorrectly that those historical statistics will persist in the future over the lifetime of a piece of infrastructure, which may be 50 years or more. So we have been working with them to alter the way the building code is written to allow for those kind of changing statistics of the intensity and duration and frequency of events like precipitation. And I think there's lots of scope for that to expand into things like permafrost, which also have very tangible, very practical design implications, and for which we could potentially provide that kind of information if we were to get our act together to do that. So with that, maybe I'll stop and hand the microphone over.
And there the discussion will go. But first, that's a natural segue, I think, to Deepika and her very specific perspective that I think builds very well on yours, Greg.
Thank you. So I represent the insurance and the reinsurance industry. I work for a company that sells reinsurance, which is basically insuring insurance companies. So we're looking at, taking full portfolios from insurance companies and then protecting them. So if there's a wildfire going on in Fort McMurray, a singular insurance company may say, well, we'll keep the first 10 million worth of losses. The rest of the 90 million or so, we'll cede away to a reinsurer. That's where we come in. I'm going to start a little bit in terms of what the reinsurance industry, as soon as I say reinsurance or insurance, just assume I mean the same thing. But what it is that we do well, and I'll end up in terms of what we do poorly to lead towards where I see more cooperation needed and kind of the way forward. So in my industry, so I specifically work with property and casualty insurance. And when we're looking at singular instances, so some of the things that Robert and Emily were talking about when it comes to mining industry, for instance, companies and individuals are behaving differently because of the different the movements that we're seeing in the environment from the permafrost. So the fact that we have mining companies now who are trying to shorten the lives of their mines because they're concerned that with the thawing of the permafrost, that their foundations are shaken. They will not be able to operate for as long as they were initially estimating it to be the case. There are quite a lot of pollution risks involved in terms of tailings dams. So that's basically as soon as you're extracting minerals and metals from the ground, you're trying to wash away all the stuff you don't need that you can't sell. And a lot of that produces toxins and that get put into a pond. But these are quite big ponds, so hence called tailing dams. And you try to build barriers around there to kind of keep the liquid that's toxic stable for a long time. It'll slowly evaporate, and once it is dried, you can then do something with it. Well, those tailing dams that are occurring, that are currently in areas of permafrost, they are destabilizing. So whenever you're seeing pictures of permafrost thaws, and you can see that natural lakes are being drained here and there, these tailings dams draining is kind of like the scary situation, the scary scenario for us in the insurance industry. That's something that currently is very much at risk. So in terms of Greg's comments, in terms of the policy standards and that, we really need that across the board. There's certain industries like the mining risks or the mining industry that probably need more standards and more help in terms of how they're going to operate successfully so and safely so for them and for all of us. There are a lot of different ways I could go into it. So that's one example. Another example would be something that we haven't actually seen in Canada yet, but something that we're quite concerned about in the industry, which is on the casualty side. So we're starting to see class action lawsuits occurring in different parts of the world where you're going to have a lot of general citizenry basically putting forward class action lawsuits against singular companies for them knowing about the climate change impact that their companies are doing and not taking the right kind of mitigative and adaptive stances that they should do. So Shell, for instance, in the Netherlands, there's quite a lot of mining companies in Australia. We also see these class action lawsuits now going on in the UK, and I would say it's a matter of time before it reaches us in Canada, but it surely will. So those are kind of the things that we see on a daily basis and that I am actively discussing with my colleagues when it comes to the underwriting sphere, when it comes to both what I see coming in from my insurance cedants, the people that are my clients I do business with, as well as how do I assess the risk that we're seeing. So that leads me into what we in the industry, we do well is that we think about the risks. We think about how do we live, how do we interact within the environment, both the natural and the non-natural. So when we think about scenarios like Emily was saying that, well, there's one road or we're trying to build a road, there's a certain highway. Robert was saying that, and I think Kumar was saying that, well, there are these landslides that are occurring. That's a problem in and of itself. It's a heightened problem when we're thinking about some of these permafrost regions where there's one road in, and that's it. So we were quite in a fury in the insurance industry when it came to the Fort McMurray wildfire, because we could see that there was such operational risk in terms of how are we going to help people, how are we going to rebuild when there's one road going north-south, south of Fort McMurray and one on the north side. We don't even have that luxury in the permafrost area. There's just one road going from south to north. That is an operational risk. So those are kind of the things where we're very good at pinpointing, well, this is from a risk management area, something that we really need to do much more work on. How do we get around to do that? What is needed? How do we work together? And we're also very good at quantifying it. So I think that in terms of the conversation we've had so far, quantifying in terms of what the monetary impact is, that can sometimes be very, very tricky in terms of how risks should be monetized. That is also something that the insurance industry does quite well. Then leading to what we do not do well. Oh, sorry, one more thing that we do well is we do take a long-term perspective. So me as an insurer, I don't want to insure a house that's made of sticks. Using the wolf and the three little pigs story here. I want to insure the one made of bricks. So really the reason for that is that there's a long-term view. Whenever you have an insurable interest, I own a house. I, as the individual owning it and living there, want to make sure that I can live there for a long time. And that's kind of the check mark from an insurance perspective. You want that insurable interest. You want someone who takes care of their place. Risk management is in place. It's built properly. The right codes are being applied. And the right codes are instilled in the first place. So that's a check mark. So there's a long-term view. An insurer is unlikely to go in and do a Band-Aid situation and then pull out again afterwards. Insurance really goes in for the long term. Now, what we don't do so well then is those short-term Band-Aids. And also what we don't do very well is if there isn't enough economic interest, it's not a viable solution from a monetary perspective. I work for a shareholding company. I answer to the shareholders. So if I can't show that, well, there's actually money in this prospect, I'm not going to get a green light to go ahead on something. So leading towards where I'd love to see more work and support and collaboration going on is very much so in the public-private partnership area. So I think PPPs is probably the way to go. There's certain things, we're talking about all these individuals that we are, and we need to work better together. We bring certain strengths. There are other strengths that are needed from elsewhere. But I don't think any of us can do it alone. And from my current role and the insights that I have in terms of the insurance industry, there is actually a positive example that maybe some of you here in the audience is aware of, but Public Safety Canada is working very well and very openly and transparently with the insurance industry on the flood file. So the high-risk flood, the fact that, we have very sad cases of Abbotsford when that gets flooded in the Fraser River Valley, we see quite a lot of people not having insurance. That's because the insurance industry doesn't find it to be viable. But as Canada, we do not want anybody not having flood insurance. So even if they're living in a flood zone, it might not be of their choosing. They might have lived there 50 years ago, or as Robert was saying, for much longer time than that. And simply the environment they're in is turning into a flood zone. Well, that's not something that they designed themselves. So we want to make sure that we can help people there. So the public-private partnership that's developing on the flood file in Canada is actually something that gives me a lot of hope. And I'm hoping that we can use that as a beacon to learn to work together on the permafrost file, because it's damned important.
Thank you for that succinct summary. Okay, so thanks. So there's introductions, initial perspectives, knowledge. I'm going to pose one or two questions now to get the conversation going. I'll see how long the answers are, and as soon as I can, turn it over to you folks in the audience to pose your questions, because I get to ask them questions for years. So we've heard there are many different types of permafrost-related research activities. monitoring activities and so on, many kinds across Canada. And I've heard from all of you that there is an unmet demand for permafrost knowledge, as well as the policy action that would grow from that. So what, in your view, could be done to scale up action, scale up research, and supports to enhance Canada's capacity for research, for adaptation, for mitigation? How does collaboration play into that? What are your thoughts on how, we've all said we need to do this better. What are your thoughts on doing this better? Robert, I'll look for your hand if you want to jump in. But Dipka, sure.
You have to stop me because I could keep going. Well, I think there's so many different strands. So I like to think in sequence. I'm also a very visual thinker. So I think that without the research, without knowing exactly what physically is happening, I think we really need to start there. And the fact that we're so underfunded, and the fact that half of our territory is covered in permafrost, less and less so by the day, and we don't understand the full ramifications. I think currently a lot of the research is only on the physical component and not quite on the interaction between how we live versus those physical components. What does it mean for biodiversity? When it comes to the peat moss that Robert was referring to, are we more at risk for peat fires that can burn for decades? So, and what does that mean for the people living near these places? So I think that we really start, this is again speaking with the insurance angle on, we really want to start with knowledge and capacity building before we can get towards sustainable solutions. So I think that if we try to design something now in terms of what the best way forward is, we're going to be doing so with like one big patch over one of our eye, if not like an eye and a half, right? So I think it really starts with research and making that more extensive.
Thanks. So Robert and then Greg.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I did want to add something in, and I think it might have been based on something that Kumari might have mentioned. So in terms of like actionable items, I mean, right off the bat, one of the challenges that we run into in all across Canada is getting access to the kind of core baseline information that's needed to make better decisions. And yet we have all these major infrastructure, resource projects, whatever, that go on, and they don't have to share the information that is collected as part of that. And I mean, oftentimes it's collected as part of environmental assessment processes, and yet, researchers, governments, sometimes have to beg to get access to that information, which is a real stumbling block, where you're, if that's not provided or not easily available, you end up sitting in a position where extra work is having to be done for things that have already been collected, and sometimes collected in much, a much higher precision. So like little things like that actually kind of matter a bit at times with this sort of thing. The other, challenge is that, just like it's a small permafrost team in NWT, like at the federal government level, it's a relatively small permafrost team there at the Geological Survey, and they do a tremendous amount of work with a very small group. And yet we're repeatedly always saying how important permafrost is. But, and not to pick on I had a talk yesterday on climate services in Canada's North, and I think I might have picked a bit too much on Environment Canada yesterday, so I might leave Greg alone. But what I'll say is not to pick too much, but, there's a disproportionality of resources allotted even from the federal government towards some areas versus others. And there's some of this core information. Like I've talked to people who do research, who are like people who do superficial mapping. So they map sediments, and that's really important for understanding ground ice. And I mean, they struggle to get the resources needed to generate Canada-wide maps of those things. So we have like maps of like 1 to 1 million that cover large areas. And yet at the same time, we're talking about, a kilometer to 10 kilometer grid cell climate information, but yet 1 to a million for the type of information needed to predict where the most at-risk places are. And so there's a real difference and contrast in the level of how much this information is often used to talk about the issues of climate change versus how much it's actually supported.
Thanks. Greg.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a clever analogy, but I don't quite have it. But to me, there's kind of, in an oversimplified way, and this applies to not just permafrost, but lots of other things. There's a big user stakeholder community that would like information about this. So in permafrost, we've heard from lots of different entities, from local governments to the insurance industry to, the transport sector, the mining sector, the oil and gas sector. Lots of interest in this and interest in knowing how permafrost will change in the future, where it will change, by how much, how quickly, what will the landscape look like after it's changing or while it's changing, all of those kind of things. So that's a pretty big swath of people with an interest. We have an academic community with people at different universities doing research on different areas of this. Often, kind of focused on a particular area. This is somebody's doing research on this topic in this place, and somebody else is doing research on that topic in another place. And then we have organizations like mine, which are kind of integrative in that we try to take all of this scientific information together, integrate it into this comprehensive Earth system model that, a big computing system that tries to simulate the entire Earth system from the top of the atmosphere to the bottom of the ocean and all of the interacting processes that shape how emissions from human activities ultimately lead to changes in the climate. Now, all those stakeholders would like information that we're able to provide to tell them about what is going to happen in the future, about permafrost, about snow, about sea ice, about agricultural land, about coastal ecosystems. The list is very long. We're a pretty small organization, so we can't possibly cover in great depth all of those things. So I think one of the things that we don't do very well and could do a better job on is better connection between the academic community and the government research community, informed by this big user community, to work a little bit more in a distributed way. And we've had some success on that. In the early days, 15 years ago or so, when we were really working on expanding our what was then referred to as a global climate model and transforming it into an Earth system model by including terrestrial ecosystems and ocean ecosystems, so we could simulate the global carbon cycle and its feedbacks with the global physical climate system. That was our goal. There was lots of reasons to do that. And so fortunately, there was an opportunity to fund a large network project that brought in people from the university sector, somebody who is an expert in grasslands, somebody who is an expert in boreal forests, someone who's expert in, detailed phenology of certain kinds of plants or what have you. And so we assembled a group of people. And it took quite a bit of time to get all those university guys to understand what the heck it is that we're doing and what we need from them and, work together. But we ultimately did produce this, very good world-class Earth system model. We could do more of that, but the real impediment in the last while has been a lack of funding that would support university partners to work with us and internal support to cover our part of that collaboration. And I think there's lots of scope for doing better there. And just sharing out the workload, the R&D workload sort of between government labs and the academic sector, and both be guided by kind of the compelling problems that arise from the user community.
Thanks. just a minute, because we have to let the audience have a question.
Okay, I'll be really quick. Just to sort of build on what Greg was saying, one of the sort of first steps that I see in this is that because the permafrost community in Canada is quite siloed and spread amongst many different sectors, one of the first steps is just to identify who the knowledge holders are, including our Indigenous partners and their traditional knowledge and observations, as well as, and within the federal government departments, within universities, within the territorial governments, and then who the knowledge users and what the knowledge needs are, and identify those. And Jennifer Spence and I are talking about the need to map out who is permafrost in Canada, and make sure that we're being inclusive in that.
Okay, I'm going to throw it open now to anybody who wants to ask a question. Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Sonia Toller. I'm with the Geological Survey. I can do this. Hi. I'm Sonia Toller with the Geological Survey of Canada. So I guess one of those knowledge holders. So my question for the panel builds on the last two comments, right? It's a little bit about what are some tangible next steps that we can take as a community in order to paint the picture of how we're going to address permafrost knowledge, sharing of information, data pieces. I feel like there's an umbrella needed that we can all fit under, and I think in a very constructive way. But I think maybe what we're missing is a little bit of understanding what the glue can be there.
Good question. And I look forward to hearing some perspectives on what makes up that kind of umbrella. What could make up that kind of umbrella? Come on.
Cheated last time. No, I think it is a good question, and I think it's kind of like we need to kind of throw all the cards down on the table and find out, what people's motivations are, how their funding structures are set up, what the barriers and opportunities within those funding structures are. Another thing that I'm getting a lot of phone calls about that I was not expecting is permafrost data and not only the management of it, but the ownership of it, and how accessible it is, and whether the raw data is accessible, or whether it's the analyzed data, the results of work. These values are very different between researchers at universities that have that's their intellectual their capital, and the federal and the territorial governments who are dealing with public geoscience data that should be open and accessible to everyone. So there's a lot of work that can be done there, but I think the first step is just to say, okay, we do not have a lot of time. There are urgent needs, and we need to get the right people at the table to talk openly about where we're at.
Right, I think you have over to Greg again.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think one of the things or one of the reasons for the situation we have now is that the federal government in general has been fairly passive in terms of directing research. There's government labs that do things that kind of only government labs can do. There's the academic sector that does its thing, and we have not really tried to influence the academic sector particularly, even through the granting councils. They are proposal responsive as opposed to, prescriptive in some way. I think that the Climate Science 2050 document that now is out there and the implementation plan that will be released in the next month or so does provide an opportunity where, a lot of effort was spent on communicating with different parts of the academic sector and different parts of the federal government sector, and to some extent other levels of government, to really understand what are some of the key topics that we need to investigate as part of being better prepared for climate change, being better understand how the climate will change, how we can better adapt, how we can use mitigation tools to reduce that change. I think that plan provides some of that glue. If the, I mean, it's sticky, but whether it actually glues things together is going to depend on whether, resources get attached to it to really allow people and fund people to work together. But I've been struck actually that over the last year, as part of that process, we've been having a lot more discussions with counterparts in other government departments where we have mutual or somewhat overlapping interest in. So, I've been having meetings with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans on coastal oceans and how they will change in a future climate, with agriculture, with health. There's lots of things. So I think this is spurring some of that connection. And I think whether the monetary glue comes is going to really determine how successful that will be.
Yeah. So Robert's got a hand up. With the privilege of the moderator, coming back to Sonia's question, tangible next steps. So we wish for funding. Can we do in part to help you do that? Right? And to help the community become more tangible in those steps. So I think these are really good questions to provoke that action. Anyway, Robert, over to you.
So I might take a little bit of a contradictory viewpoint on that. Like, obviously we would say, yes, we need, there needs to be more funding, but I think we also have to be a little bit cognizant that the role of the federal government in kind of dictating future paths for research is also very much quite influenced by the tools that they help to provide. And like we sit here, I'm a researcher who does a lot of permafrost work, but I also do a lot of climate change work. And we're dealing with issues where the federal government is stopping their climate stations in our region and is saying it's not our problem. We're trying to pass off to the provinces or to individuals or whatever. And so, I worry a little bit about having more and more funding put towards, research goals, towards modeling, towards whatever, while core infrastructure that is needed to better understand the impacts of climate change is not being continued. Like, I think sometimes there's, with research, you're always being asked to do something new. You're often being asked to propose how you can take this a step further, how you can take this and be innovative or answer this new question. And what you end up often with is a lot of projects that are you get a 3 or 4 year window or a 5-year window and then move on to something else. And what I hear from a lot of individuals is the need for continuity. And that's a role that I think on the federal government side, that's an entity that can provide some of that in a way that researchers at institutions can't really. And, we're sitting here in a situation where if you wanted to, look at changes in precipitation over the last 50 years at northern weather stations, the federal government data hasn't been updated in 5 years, right? With the accurate stuff. So you end up using products that are being, created in a weather modeling lab in the UK. And that's what's really happening, is that we're having some areas where we're advancing and then other areas we're taking steps back in the north. And I just want to kind of call attention to that a little bit.
Thanks, Robert. Some good points. Other questions from our gallery here? Yes, sir.
Thanks. Hey, Dr. Way. I took a course here a while ago, so it's good to see you. I guess my question is you were talking about, mostly directed towards Greg, you were talking about developing, global climate models. And the work I work with DRDC, and a lot of the stuff we kind of hear about is, we need to start focusing our work a little bit more and working more in the international community. And, the Arctic is probably our best bet for targeting our research. I'm just wondering what sort of steps do you see being taken to work internationally and to try and target our research a bit more?
Well, I think it's, working collaboratively internationally is essential. Canada is a pretty small place in the world scheme of things. And in the same way that I was alluding to, government labs like the one I'm involved in needing to collaborate with the academic community, which, in terms of number of people is much bigger than we are. That's important, but we also have to collaborate with international partners who bring other capabilities, other tools, and people, expertise to bear on certain projects or certain topics. And we do collaborate a lot internationally on things like satellite remote sensing, for example. We're heavily involved in a lot of mission development, like for this Arctic observing mission, for the terrestrial snow mapping mission. We have experts who are on the science teams developing those things, but obviously that's not something Canada can do on its own. So we have to, that's just one example of those kind of things. We do a lot of field work in the Arctic that is collaborative with both universities in Canada and also partners from elsewhere. It's essential because we, especially in the Arctic, where it is so expensive to operate, so expensive to mount a field program, for example, doing it with others and really trying to get the most bang you can out of it is essential. So, I mean, I don't know that I can say much more than that, other than yes, we have to do it. And there are mechanisms through things like the Arctic Council where things like that can get discussed and plans can be made, through the World Climate Research Program, which is another entity under which lots of climate research, including field programs and things, get organized. Has not been so active in the Arctic recently, but a lot of tropical climate research related to clouds and convection, for example, a lot of that is coordinated under the auspices of the WCRP, and that's another body in which we could you take advantage of to collaborate and coordinate internationally.
So thank you. Just one little response here, then over to John, and I will just note we now know to add DRDC to our list of departments that do permafrost related research.
Yeah, there's increasingly more international interest in and projects that are coming to Canada to do permafrost research, including the Permafrost Pathways projects that's recently gotten $42 million to come look at permafrost, circumpolar permafrost carbon and policy work related both to modeling of permafrost carbon and the relocation of communities, similar to the situation that Tuktoyaktuk that was featured on the National this week. And often for Northerners, people have to apply for a research license in the Northwest Territories. I'm sure it's similar in other research regions to come and do permafrost research. And but oftentimes the permafrost researchers in the Northwest Territories don't know about these projects beforehand. We're not engaged on them. So that is something that we need to. That's a very tangible policy related action that needs to happen. We're host to the president of the International Permafrost Association is Chris Byrne, who is in Ottawa at Carleton University. So we do have a presence and a long history within the international permafrost community. And Canada is hosting the next international conference on permafrost in Whitehorse in 2024. So we're active in this community. As permafrost scientists, what's not happening is the coordination of all of the players within Canada to the extent that it needs to happen and that it is happening in other countries.
Could you Turn it back to John. Next question.
Thanks. Very interesting panel. I'm John Holdren at Harvard University, where I'm one of the co-founders of the Arctic Initiative there and a partner in the Permafrost Pathways project we presented on Wednesday here. One of my partners is Jen Spence, who's next to me here and whom we hijacked from Canada to Harvard temporarily. But the question I have is this. There's been a lot of reference in this conversation to stovepipes and to the great diversity of groups in Canada and groups within the Canadian government who are working on different pieces of the Permafrost Pathways project. This is something that we struggled with extensively in the Obama administration. I was the chief science advisor to President Obama for 8 years, and we created a number of entities to try to deal with this stovepiping. For example, Obama created something within the White House called the Arctic Executive Steering Committee, which was responsible for coordinating all Arctic issues across the 25 departments, agencies, and offices in the executive branch that have all these diverse Arctic responsibilities. And it worked pretty well. Unfortunately, Trump dismantled it immediately, and it's now been restored under Biden. We also have within the executive branch something called the National Science and Technology Council, which is composed of the leaders of all the cabinet departments and non-cabinet agencies with science and technology responsibilities. And it spawns cross-agency initiatives like the U.S. Global Change Research Program. The USGCRP has 13 agencies and departments in it who collaborate on issues related to global change. I would not assert that we're getting it right yet in the United States, but I'm just wondering the extent to which folks on the panel have thought about, is there more that the Canadian government should be doing in this domain of trying to cut across the stovepipes, of trying to better integrate all these different activities, which are all splendid in their own right, but maybe not sufficiently in communication?
We have one federal member on this panel.
Go, Greg.
But if others have views on this and have had experience, and I know there are some in the room who may have had experience on how Canada has been wrestling with this problem for some time, they could certainly contribute. But Greg, do you have a few words to say?
Well, I don't. We don't have the equivalent structures that you just described, but there are some things that are aimed at the same at addressing the same problem. So there are these tables, either at the assistant deputy or deputy minister level, that cross departments on various topics. So there's one on adaptation, for example. There's a bunch of topics. Most of this is above my pay grade, so I don't get involved in those except when I'm asked to brief on something. But there are some mechanisms like that. I'm not in a position that I would know how to comment on how effective they are, or whether they're really achieving what they set out. But there are some mechanisms anyway that attempt to address that.
We have two people who want to speak, but just my comment on that. They're well-intentioned. They tend not to be as open to the outside community as perhaps they could be, and therefore, constrain their effectiveness in the kind of coordination I think we're all trying to get at here. So,
Janet Hallowell, another Janet. My career has been looking at the funding structures and working with the funding structures in this country, as well as some of the advisory bodies. And I think we are suffering a deficit of overarching structures. We don't have a National Advisory Board on Science and Technology. We don't have those sort of coordinating bodies. And what I see here is a need for almost a concerted program that brings together all the players, but it is one that has a long-term investment in the infrastructure. And the infrastructure is not just physical, it's people, it's data, it's a knowledge base. And thinking back over time, there's one example that I would bring forward of how things were different, and that was the Major Lithoprobe project in Canada, which was back in the 80s, and the earth sciences community came together with a couple of dynamo leaders who pulled together the academic community, the Geological Survey of Canada, the industry, and basically pulled them into a room and knocked heads together and said, we as our science community are losing our way, our leadership, in this case, but we need to ask, what are the big questions for Canada? Where can we make a difference? Where can we actually come together? And it took them a couple of days to bash out ideas, but they came together with a major initiative that had extensive engagement of all sectors. Now, the funding did flow to universities, and I think as I look forward at major concerted programs in the future, I think we have to look more seriously about how funding flows. It's not just to universities. It's not just founded in governments. Somehow we've got to get a partnership approach. So concerted programs, we don't have those in Canada right now. The closest, perhaps recently, has been the networks of centers of excellence that have also suffered a death. Those didn't have the longevity, and they didn't necessarily have the permanence of the knowledge infrastructure that we need here.
Just a quick follow-up inspired by your comment. One of the other things we tried in the Obama administration was to link the federal government activities with state, local, and tribal activities. And we had a task force that was called the Task Force of State, Local, and Tribal Leaders on Climate Change Adaptation. And it met over a period of a couple of years. It produced 104 recommendations for the Obama administration on how the government could better support what states, tribes, and local communities need to achieve and are trying to achieve in the adaptation space. And that's a broader sort of integration, of course, which is more like what you were talking about. But it was quite successful. They produced 104 recommendations, specific recommendations about how the federal government could be more helpful to the folks at all these other levels that are the ones on the ground trying to solve the problem.
Okay, just want to note that I think we're over time, but CSPC hasn't thrown us out yet. So I think we'll go as long as people want to talk and the technology stands up. So I have a question back here and a question here.
So I'm Stefan Gruber. I'm with Carleton University and the scientific director of NSERC Permafrost.net. So what we've just heard were suggestions and models for de-stovepiping that would be very helpful. And I want to connect this back to something that Greg said earlier on. So there were research networks partnering with government initiatives, and out of this came the Canadian Earth System model. And imagining this model as kind of the campfire that people assemble around, right? It's the boundary object around which really this collaboration could happen. It's also together with the capacity on the organizations running numerical weather prediction, the delivery of services. That is really what retains that knowledge between successive generations of that network until today, makes it available to people. So the question that I want all of us to think about is recognizing that we're in a hurry with catching up with permafrost. The answer is not going to be in an Earth system model alone, because there's different disciplines involved. There's the subsurface geology, geotech engineering, other aspects of ecosystems, completely different scales. What is it that we need as organizations, as capabilities, as services, as models that is able to very quickly bring together those different disciplines, government departments, north, south, and interests, and connect to that de-stovepiping? Because the actual work of people together around an object, around something that they work on together, I think is going to be a great accelerator.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Adele Schöpfer. I'm from the German Aerospace Center. So probably most of you know my colleagues at the Earth Observation Center, just next to Munich. I just wanted to let you know that I'm very proud being here for the whole month of November. So I'm making connections here, working with NRC together with Canadian Space Agency, and also looking forward for new potential cooperations and partners. So I just wanted to let you know that we just launched our latest hypersector satellite in April, NMAP, so you probably heard about it. It went into operation just last days. So this is a free and open data source. So please visit nmap.org, the webpage, if you don't know. And if you need any information from my colleagues from the Earth Observation Center in Munich, I would love to connect you with them. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to cut this off now because people do have to move on to other sessions, but I thank you for your interest and the engagement. I think we poked some of those topics we were trying to explore a bit more deeply, and hopefully this will continue to provoke those discussions, and hopefully it will build the connections even more. Lots of ideas I think that everyone's taking away with them. But we do have a path forward. We've heard the word urgency repeatedly, siloed, all of those pieces. And we've heard that it's expensive and it's risky, and that's real, and it's increasing as well. So I think those are real drivers. It's the society of Canada, it's the economy of Canada, it's the people of Canada, and it's that important. And we can choose to address this, like get our elbows up and get to work, or continue to just keep kind of trying. We have new colleagues, I think, from the States as well to work with. And I just invite everybody here to join in the conversation. I think we'll be talking to a few people here about tangible next steps in this conversation in the next short while. Go to permafrostnet.ca, go to CPA, go to the Permafrost Pathways websites, and you'll see the connections, the names, the linkages that you might be interested. So I thank you very much for your time today and for your engagement in this discussion. Have a great afternoon.